Hey there, it's Jacques from Heroes and Legends, and today is part 6 of our 6-part Battle for Zendikar Set review. Today we're going to look at all the colorless and multicolor cards. If you missed the first 5 parts, there is a playlist you can catch up, but basically each day we looked at one of the 5 colors. Today we're going to hit the rest of the set. So one side note, tomorrow we'll be back with another video, which is going to be a pre-release primer for the pre-release event this weekend. In that video, I'm going to talk about the expeditions. So you won't see the expeditions in the actual set review since technically they're not part of the set, although they are legal to play in limited, but we will talk about those tomorrow. So having said that, we got a ton of cards to go through, so I'm just going to jump in and try to go as efficiently as possible through these. First, we're going to look at all the colorless cards, and just as a side note, most of these are just going to be great limited cards because they're very expensive, very flashy, big bomb Eldrazi's for the most part. Now, one word of warning I will have about these is when you build your limited deck, especially in sealed, be careful. There are a lot of ways to ramp, but at the same time, some of these cards just look so good, and if you open a whole bunch of them, you may want to include a lot of them. But when you're looking at things at the 7, 8, 9, 10 casting cost range, be careful not to put too many of them in your deck. You're going to have to go and pick the ones you like the best. They're going to fit best in your curve. And the bottom line is you probably don't want more than 2 of them in most cases in your deck, even if you do have a fair amount of ramp, just because you just might draw a handful of them and lose a game due to that fact in general. So having said that, let's jump in. First one is Bane of Beleged. It's going to be a fantastic card for you. Costs 7, which is relatively reasonable considering the stats, and it's a 7/5. And what I like about this is it's a little bit of a throwback to the Annihilation ability from Rise of the Eldrazi. It kind of has a Annihilator 2, if you will. Every time it attacks, your opponent will have to take 2 permanents and exile them. So really big bomb, very good limited card. Blade Herder. Another good card. Now, this one I like because it only costs 5, and you get a 4/5 out of it, which isn't a huge body, but it is a processor, and if you can process, especially in a blue or blue-black build, this is very, very nice because you get 3 Scion tokens. They're going to help you ramp to some other bigger Eldrazi, or you just plain got 3 Scion tokens. There's a lot of things you can do by going wide in this limited environment as well. Next, we have Breaker of Armies. This is just a bomb. This is an 8-drop, so it's fairly expensive, but at the same time not unattainable in this environment, and it's a 10/8. Creatures are forced to block this, so if your opponent has another big Eldrazi on the board, it might just simply be a trade. But at the same time, if they're going aggro, have a lot of little creatures, it can basically act as a board wipe if those creatures are not tapped. If they're coming in and attacking you, though, this becomes not as good at taking out the creatures, and it can be chump blocked. So this isn't maybe as good as some of the other Eldrazi's, but it's still a 10/8 body on the board for 8. It's not going to be a bad card by any means. Conduit of Ruin. This is another one that's kind of mid-range cost. It costs 6 for a 5/5. And what's kind of nice about this one is it lets you tutor as well. So whenever you cast this, you can look for another creature card that's 7 or greater. So basically another huge Eldrazi. And also on top of it, the first creature spell you cast is 2 less to cast each turn. That can be a big deal when you're trying to cast another Eldrazi. So this is one that if I say maybe running 2 really big Eldrazi's, maybe an 8-drop and a 10-drop in my deck, this is a great complement to that because once I get to 6 mana, now I can basically drop an 8-drop next turn as long as this guy stays alive, and I can search out my 8-drop. So that's pretty cool. This is a good one. Not only does this work as a decent creature at 5/5 body size, but it's also going to be good for ramping you as well into other big, hopefully game-ending Eldrazi's like an Ulamog. Next is Deathless Behemoth. Another fair mid-range card at 6, and this gives you a 6/6 with Vigilance. Another real strong limited card, really like this. Sacrifice 2 Scions to get this back from the graveyard is also an ability that's not completely irrelevant. Maybe not super exciting, considering once you get into the later game, your plan, if you're on this plan, is probably to have even a bigger creature than a 6/6. But at the same time, it's not nothing, and this is a really strong board impacting Eldrazi. Desolation Twin. Now this one should be basically a finisher. you're getting 20 points of power toughness on the board when you cast this one for 10. It comes in the form of 2 creatures, but that's okay. That makes it even harder to chump block since this doesn't have evasion itself. But having 2 10/10 creatures, sometimes there's a point where that just won't matter. You can only chump block so much, and this thing's just going to come in for some serious damage. And if there's any way to give this invasion, even for a turn, or one of the creatures' invasion, you're doing some crazy damage. So this is one of the big moms that you'll have no problem playing in limited. It's a rare. You won't see it all the time, but it's real good. Eldrazi Devastator. I like this guy. He reminds me a little bit of Ulamog's Crusher. You kind of trade the Annihilator 2 for Trample, and he gets an extra power of toughness, extra point of toughness. But I will say this. I actually like this better than Ulamog's Crusher. I don't know how many times I've had a Crusher out whenever he was legal and limited, and kind of said to myself, wow, if this only had Trample, I'd be in a good spot right now. And this is a 8/9 with Trample for 8, and I like that a lot. Starts to get a little expensive at the 8-drop spot, but there's so many ways to ramp. This is a card that you can consistently get out in limited, and it's just going to do some damage. The Trample is going to be huge for you. It's also at the common level. You're going to see a lot of these in play. You're going to have to play around this card. Endless One. I love this one. Now, this is the first card that, all the other ones we looked at, not to say that there couldn't be some play in Standard with maybe 1 or 2 of them, especially maybe the 5 or 6 drops. But for the most part, I think they're going to be a little too expensive to see consistent Standard play or anything like that. However, I will say this is one that maybe could see some Standard play just because it's a card that is colorless. Any deck can play it, and no matter what turn you're on, it's on curve. If you need a 1/1, it's a 1/1. If you need a 2/2, it's a 2/2 for 2. If you need a 3-drop, it's a 3-drop. If you need a 10-drop, it's a 10-drop. It's just got so much flexibility. It is rare, so you're not going to see it a whole ton in limited, but it's pretty much an auto-include, I think. It's just on curve. It's a creature that's always on curve. I mean, that's pretty cool. Perhaps could see some Standard play here and there in some decks that are looking for a missing 2-drop or missing 3-drop, because if they don't draw it at the 2 or 3-drop, it can also be a 6-drop. So there's just a lot of versatility here. It's very interesting. I mean, it's not Hangerback Walker, right? I mean, it doesn't have evasion. It doesn't have any tricks to get more creatures when it dies or anything like that. But it's just a really just fine card that does work. So I like it. Don't underestimate this one. Gruesome Slaughter. This is the first colorless card that, I don't know, I'm just not super excited about. If I'm playing limited and I cast this thing for 6, there's just so much that has to go right for you. You have to have creatures in play that you weren't planning on attacking with anyway. Then you have to tap them, and your opponent has to have creatures that you can destroy with them. It just seems so conditional. I mean, yeah, there is a moment in time where this will be good, but at the same time, when is that going to happen? Are you going to draw it at that moment? So I don't like this one. I'd probably skip it. It's sad that it's a rare. I just think it's just not super strong. As far as other formats go, I find this interesting. Maybe in a commander deck, if you're playing just a lot of colorless creatures, this is a good way to just make a huge impact on the board. It's probably more what this card was probably designed for, something along those lines. I mean, all these cards we've been looking at would be fine commander cards, obviously, as far as a colorless creature Eldrazi / artifact deck, and this is a better utility card for that type of thing. Kozilek's Channeler. Here's some ramp for you. It costs 5. You get a 4/4 out of it, which is actually a nice little bonus. But let's face it, you want this because it's going to tap for 2 mana. So the 4/4 doesn't have any evasion, but it's still a 4/4 body. That's nothing to scoff at. There's going to be times where it's just going to go in the red zone. But yeah, tapping it for 2 mana to help you build to your next big Eldrazi is key. And this is common, so it should be pretty easy to get your hands on in limited. Oblivion Sower. This one's very reasonable. It's 6, you get a 5/8 body. I really like that. And then on top of it, it does some other pretty cool things. And it sits there and exiles 4 cards off your opponent's library, and then it lets you play some of their lands, which also works really well with landfall strategy. And this is a colorless card for 6, so you can throw this into your red-green landfall deck, and it could do some work there as well as in another, say, processor deck or something like that, like blue-black processor. So this can be kind of put into a lot of different decks, and it can have some synergies with some different archetypes. Really like this card. This card I got to play with a little bit in the dual decks, and it does some work. It's very reasonably costed for its size, for sure. Now it is a mythic, so you're not going to see tons of these lying around, but pretty good. Is it good enough to see some play in Standard, considering you get a 5/8 for 6? I don't know, just because it doesn't have evasion, doesn't really have a way to protect itself like hexproof or anything. I think it dies a little too easy to removal, and isn't going to be able to react fast enough, but hey, it's a good limited card regardless. This is Rune Processor. This one's interesting. It's a good sideboard card, I think. Let's say I'm running an 8-drop and a 9-drop Eldrazi, and then I come up against a aggro deck that's just doing a lot of damage fast, and I want to get some extra life gain. Maybe I take out my 8-drop and I put this guy in instead, or take out my 9-drop. And now I got a 7/8 body for 7, which is still pretty good, especially against an aggro deck. And I also could process to gain 5 life. So I think that's what this guy's for. I think in most cases you're going to have better Eldrazi and limited to choose from than this one. But he does have a little bit of a niche role, and you'll be happy when you need him that he'll be in your sideboard, because he is a common. He'll probably be in your sideboard. Scour from Existence. This is interesting to me. Wow, this is powerful. I'm going to play 7 at instant speed, exile target permanent. End of story. So you can hit anything with this. Planeswalkers, lands, creatures, enchantments, whatever. So that's pretty awesome. It's at common, so there's going to be plenty of these floating around. So this is huge and limited. Limited bomb. You're going to really control the board state with cards like this. Play around this, because there's going to be a lot out there. Don't forget that exists if your opponent's sitting on 7 unopened mana and a card in their hand. You could be in for some trouble. But is it strong enough for Standard? That's a good question. I don't know at this moment. There is a lot of ramp in this set. There could be a deck that takes advantage of that and uses Scour from Existence. It's just so powerful. So I don't know. Remains to be seen, but I wouldn't be completely shocked if it showed up in Standard. A lot of people have kind of thought about, I think, modern implications as far as Urzatron. Maybe. I don't know if I'm completely sold on it. I don't know if Urzatron needs this, because they have Ugin, they have Karn, but I don't know. Maybe they could use this or something like this, even if it's just a one-of. So interesting to see what happens with this one in the future. Next we have Titan's Presence, and this is going to be a really fine limited card for you, especially if you're running a couple big Eldrazi's. You have an 8-drop and a 9-drop. You know there's going to be moments where they're just going to be stuck in your hand, so this buys you a little extra time. Take out another creature, show an Eldrazi, and there you go. You bought yourself maybe another turn or two to get that big Eldrazi card out. I think it's a little too conditional for Standard. It's a good card, and there are definitely going to be some colorless spells that will get Standard play, but I don't like the fact that this is too contingent upon you having one of those in your hand. It's just not reliable enough, I think, for Standard. This is a real cool Commander card, though. There's Commander decks, again, that will use Eldrazi, that will use cards like big artifact creatures, stuff like that, where this is just kind of a cool thing to be able to have in your hand and take out a creature on the board pretty cheaply. Ulamog's Despoiler. So here's an interesting one. If I can't process with this, this isn't great. Paying 6 for a 5/5 when there's just so many better cards out there at the 6/7 drop, you don't want to necessarily be in that neighborhood. But if you're playing the black-blue deck with a lot of the small ingest creatures, and this is kind of along the top-ish side of your curve, this is going to be good for you, because if that's the case, then you're getting a 9/9 for 6, and that's pretty impactful. So this is one I'd probably skip unless I'm playing that particular archetype in limited, but can do some work for you for sure. Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger. This is the big mythic. This is one of the first cards revealed everyone was talking about. So let's talk about limited first. Yeah, obviously, if you can manage to cast this guy, cast it. He's indestructible. He's going to let you target and exile 2 permanents. He's going to let you start milling your opponent. And in limited, 20 cards is pretty significant. I mean, you're going to win within a couple turns here at worst with this card. This is really good. I don't think I need to tell you that. It's legendary, so let's talk a little bit about Commander. This will be a cool Commander card for sure. It's a little unique in the fact that it can only kind of mill out an opponent at a time if you're looking at the mill piece of it, and 20 cards on your commander decks have 100 cards in them, so that isn't quite as appealing, but it's still a 10/10 indestructible creature that's going to take out 2 permanents, so that's interesting. And I don't know, in a deck that's going to produce tons of mana, he might be a decent commander, or he could just be a card in the deck and do a little work that way as well. But he's, fun, big battle cruiser magic. I think he's a little too expensive for standard, even though he has a big effect. I just think getting to 10 won't be reliable enough, unfortunately. Does Urzatron want a card like this? I don't know if they need it. There's just other things they could be doing that are very powerful that even cost less than 10. So, and Urzatron's just so crazy that 10 mana is not that much different than, say, maybe 15 and just going ahead and casting Emrakul. So I don't know. I don't know if we'll find a home there. I'm sure somebody will try, and it'll be interesting. But Ulamog, I think it's a pretty cool card. It's going to be a huge, huge limited bomb when you do open one. Void Winnower. This is another good limited card. This is another mythic. It costs 9, but you get an 11/9 body, and I like the clause of it just makes the game harder for your opponent to play, basically. Some of their creatures won't be able to block. They won't be able to cast some of their spells. It just becomes pretty annoying pretty quick. Fun card to play in limited, definitely. This could be fun in Commander, although it'll probably get you killed if you put it on the table. People are going to get sick of trying to figure out which even cards they won't be able to block with and play with. But this one cracks me up. I just love the fact it costs 9, it's 11/9, everything about it's odd. So in more than one way. All right, we're going to move on to the multicolor spells. And much like the colorless spells, these are pretty push, and they're going to be good in most limited decks if you're in those colors. So we'll take a quick look at them and let you know which ones are better and what decks they fall into. So we'll start with Angelic Captain. Costs 5 for a 4/3. Obviously, this is an ally. You want this in an ally build, and it's going to work very well with allies and rally. So there is a Boros version of the ally deck that seems like it could be quite good, and this would fit right into it. A little bit high on the curve considering it's a 4/3, but that won't be a problem for you in limited. That will, however, I think keep it out of standard. It's just a little too fragile at 3 toughness. Bring to Light. Now here's one I really don't like, and this is maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm looking at this the wrong way. I just feel like you're jumping through a lot of hoops here to tutor for a creature, instant, or sorcery card. It doesn't even let you get planeswalkers or artifacts. So first, from the very beginning, it restricts you a little bit, which is okay. Tutors can still be great with the restrictions. I mean, we've seen that in the past. But here's the part that makes me a little crazy. I could either run this card and I'm able to tutor for a creature, instant, or sorcery, converted mana cost 2 or less if I'm playing 2 colors. If I'm lucky, I can get up to 5 or less if I'm playing all 5 colors, but that takes a lot of work. Or I could have simply replaced this card with a good 5-drop, and I could have just played it. So, now, don't get me wrong. There's something to be said for being able to tutor for the card that you need at that given moment. For example, I really need a removal, or I really need a creature, or whatever it is. That's powerful. Don't get me wrong in any means. But at the same time, I can't help but wonder, could I have just played a 5-drop Eldrazi in this spot and been just as well off without having to kind of cross my fingers and hope that this is going to work for me and I'm going to have the right colors of mana at the right time? I don't know. This is interesting to say the least. Now, having said all that, it's still a tutor. It's still going to let you play the card without having to cast its casting cost again. So paying 5 for a 2-drop isn't the end of the world because you can just still cast it for free. You end up paying 7 for a 2-drop. But what makes this card decent is the fact that there is the ability to get card selection. You can basically pull whatever you can pull based on what mana you spend into it out of your deck, and that's what makes this good. So is it always going to make your cut in limited? Definitely not. It's going to be better the more colors you're going to be able to play, obviously. But if I'm only playing a 2-color deck, I don't see myself running it. I see myself just running, say, a 5-drop Eldrazi in its place and just being happy with that at the end of the day. Brood Butcher. So this is a good card if you know you're going to have a lot of tokens. And if you're playing green, you should have a lot of tokens if you're doing it right, right? So I hate the fact that you're paying 5 for a 3/3, but the fact that you can just start kind of pitching tokens to do -2/-2 to creatures is a pretty good deal. So this is going to be a good card in limited. Certainly play it there. Brutal Expulsion. And there, it's interesting. I'll say this about blue and red, from what I'm seeing anyway. I feel like blue and red have a lot of good synergies. I can't put my finger on it and say this is why they're good together as far as a archetype is concerned, but at the same time, blue has just a lot of kind of small little devoid creatures that are doing the ingest thing and kind of help you get to the point where you have good value out of processors. And red's just doing a lot of early damage. I don't know, I just feel like these will go well together in limited. I guess we'll see. But this is a card that takes advantage of the Izzet colors, and it does some work. I mean, it costs 4. It's an instant, and it's basically a tempo play as long as maybe a creature destruction spell, even if it's a small creature. And it also helps the processors. It can even hit planeswalkers. It's just very versatile, and it's rare, so yeah, you won't see it all the time. But this is a good card. I would not hesitate playing this one in limited at all. I think it's very good. If there is a blue-red deck that has some viability in standard, I can see it running maybe at least a couple copies of this. I think it's just good value. Catacomb Sifter, and this is another good Golgari card. I really like this. Just the fact you get a 2/3 body for 3, so that's fine and limited. And you also get a colorless Eldrazi, so that makes it even better. And whenever a creature dies, you get to scry one. So yeah, you know, you might be sacrificing some tokens for mana and stuff like that. So yeah, that's a pretty powerful effect. Just anything that's going to let you scry repeatedly is a pretty big deal. I mean, even things like Sigil Starfish are awesome, and not just limited, but even constructed decks. I'd love to play with cards like that. So this is a card that's similar in some ways. Now this takes a certain condition, and that is, of course, a creature dying, but at the same time, I think that's just going to happen enough in a game in general that it's going to be very productive to scry one when that does happen. I think this is going to be really strong and limited. As far as constructed goes, it's cheap enough that I would not count this out of standard. If there's a deck that's looking for a scry effect, I don't know, Abzan? Abzan just seems to get it all. I don't know. Maybe, I guess time will tell, but I would not be shocked at all. Drana's Emissary. So I do like small flyers. Here's basically a Windrake. You get a 2/2 for 3. But at the same time, you also get to drain a life, and it's an ally on top of that. This works so good in the black and white archetype of having the allies and the vampires that get the extra bonuses when you gain life. This is just perfect way to enable some of those synergies. I love this card. It just works so perfect in that deck. Even if I wasn't strong in allies and vampires, I wouldn't mind running it just because it's a cheap flyer. But when you have those cards, this is going to be awesome. This can really kind of just tie that whole archetype together. I really like this in limited. Duststalker. This is a strong card. You get good stats here. You pay 4 for a 5/3. It has haste. It's just going to get into the red zone, hopefully. And the fact that if you have no other colorless cards, it goes back to your hand, it's not necessarily a drawback. I mean, it kind of feels like Dash, so I don't feel bad about that, especially considering it's so cheap to play. So I'd have no problem running this in an aggro deck. This is a very good aggro card, and black and red are the aggro colors for sure. So, hey, this card could be a nice little mid to top end of your aggro curve. Fathom Feeder. So black and blue, as I mentioned before, is trying to get a bunch of little ingest creatures out there that are going to get in there and hopefully mill your opponent's cards to make way for processors. This is just another card that does that. Now, this is rare. You get a 1/1 Death Toucher, but it has ingest, so your opponent might not want to block this and lose a big creature to it, so they might just give in to the ingest. And once you get to the mid-game, you can just start getting card advantage off of it. And when you get the card advantage, you also get the mill to exile the card for your processors as well. So this card's pretty awesome. This is another card that just feels really right in that deck. It's going to tie that archetype together, and it's going to be really cool. Now, this one's rare. You're not going to see it as often. The other thing I'll say about this is, in a control deck in standard, this thing is pretty cheap. I mean, it's not exactly what a control deck's looking for, but if you are flooded out on lands, you can draw some cards, so that's good. And this thing only costs 2, and it can protect you against creatures that are coming at you in the red zone. So keep an eye on this one. There's a possibility this could end up in a control build in the metagame if it's out there. Forerunner of Slaughter. So here's one of the cards that kind of goes along well with other colorless creatures, and this one especially is just another good aggro card. First off, just look at its stats. You pay 2 for a 3/2. Yeah, I'm happy with that. I'll certainly do that. And then on top of it, you can pay 1 more, and target colorless creature gains haste, and that includes itself. So if I'm paying 3 mana, I get a 3/2 haste creature, and on top of that, any other colorless creature I throw out there, or any devoid creature, I can then give haste to. Another card that really ties an archetype together. This really ties the black and red together nicely. It's uncommon, so there'll be enough of these to go around. Really fine card in that aggro archetype. I really like it. Again, let's talk about standard. It's so cheap that it could see play. If there's an aggro deck out there in standard, this could be a huge part of it. This card was also in the dual decks, and we got to play with it a little bit, and it can do some work. I think anyone who played with a dual deck and got this card knows that. So watch out for this one. This could have some big applications, I think, in the future. Grove Rumbler, and again, I like how they use these multicolor cards to kind of really flush out, hey, let me wave the flag and tell you what the archetype is. And green and red is, of course, landfall. So landfall gets a really cool landfall creature. Costs 4 for a 3/3 with trample and +2/+2 landfall. That's pretty awesome. And again, it's at the uncommon mark, so you can get these in your deck. They won't be too hard to find. They won't be overpopulating the draft, but there'll be enough of them there that you can get them and play them and tie together your deck. Now, this one I don't think will cross over into standard. I think it's a little too pricey for what it does. And landfall, as cool as it is a little conditional in the standard environment, just because you don't always have a land to drop. There are ways to manipulate that, obviously, and at the same time, if there's a really push landfall card, could get into standard, but I don't think this was quite there. Grove Tender Druid. So this is a 3/3 ally for 4, so those are pretty good stats. And the rally effect is whenever it or another ally comes into play, you get a token creature. Now, this is a plant token. It's not an Eldrazi token, so there's a little less value to be had there, but it's still there. Kind of wish it was an ally token, maybe like an ally soldier or something, but obviously this is a Selesnya card. They're theming with the concept of plants and nature, and I get that. So I guess that totally makes sense from a flavor point of view, but I feel like this card could have been pushed a little more, maybe been a little more powerful. Now, having said that, it's doing something green likes to do, and that's make tokens, and it's doing something white likes to do, which is giving a rally effect and being an ally. So these go really well together in a white and green limited deck. Herald of Kozilek. And here's another Izzet card. This one is just focused on colorless spells. So again, kind of makes sense, for that Izzet archetype, which doesn't, like I said, I can't really put my finger on, but it feels like, hey, let's ingest some creatures and be aggressive early game, and then late game, let's bring out our big bombs. And this is a way that's going to pretty well get you there. As far as standard goes, at this point in the metagame, I don't know if there's a need for this card, but keep an eye on this. If a deck emerges that's running a lot of colorless spells, you never know. This could be part of it. Kiora, Master of Death. So Kiora is a very strong planeswalker. Obviously, I like the fact, first off, I'll say her ultimate, again, is a ultimate that isn't a immediate scoop, but it's going to be real hard to survive and deal with. And I like that. I think those are pretty well designed ultimates. So this one's pretty good. I do like it. As far as her other abilities, very, very strong. Her -2 gives you card advantage. Her +1 also gives you some mana advantage, as well as can help protect her a little bit by untapping a creature. Now, she can't make tokens or anything like that, protect herself in that way, but untapping a creature and then perhaps drawing another creature card, I think is close enough to protection to make her viable, especially for a 4-drop. So yeah, she's obviously a limited bomb. You'll play her and be very happy to play her in limited. I do think she can see some standard play. I think she's giving you enough advantage that she would definitely be a great standard card. There just needs to be the right deck out there in the metagame. March from the Tomb. And this is a good Orzhov card. It does what that deck's trying to do, which is get some allies into play. The only thing I will say is it's a little contingent on the fact that you're going to have some allies in your graveyard. But if you do, it's going to be awesome, and maybe you get 2 or 3 of them back, and you can go in for an Alpha Strike and win a game. Who knows? So I don't mind running one of these in that deck. I wouldn't want more than one. There's also been some thought of this in Standard in the Ally deck, And I don't know, maybe a one of. I don't know if it's better than, say, Rally the Ancestors and kind of going that route. So I think that might be what you see more so than this card in Standard. But you never know. It could complement that strategy as well. Mundu Ambush Leader. So I really like this as a commander card, perhaps even a commander in a ally commander build. It's pretty cool because it's a 3/4 for haste, so it gets in there for damage, but it also lets you kind of sift through your cards, look for your allies, kind of bring them to the top. So I like that in a commander kind of singleton type strategy. Now when you look at limited, yeah, this is a real good limited card. I don't mind paying 4 for a 3/4 with haste, and it does let me kind of manipulate things a little bit as well on top of it. And if I have an ally build, even better. Noyendar Royal Shaper. So I spit that out. All right, so he's a 4/4 for 5, and he's a Merfolk ally. And on top of that, he awakens lands when you play a instant or sorcery spell. And it basically gives you kind of an awaken 3 effect for your lands. I think this could be a fun commander card. This could perhaps be a real fun commander to play around with, especially with land synergies. I think that would be cool. As far as limited goes, yeah, I'll pay 5 for a 4/4 that can also perhaps awaken a land or two. Now in limited, you're not running tons of instants and sorceries necessarily all the time, but if you have a couple in your deck, you could get some value out of this. In Standard, I don't know, I think he's a little too expensive in Standard, and he's a little conditional, again, on drawing instants and sorceries, so I don't find him to be reliable enough to kind of get it done in Standard, but great limited card, definitely a fun commander card. Omnith Locus of Rage, another one I spit out there. So this guy, he costs 7, and you have to have 2 red and 2 green, which is quite pricey and specific. I think that will price him out of Standard, unfortunately. Now, he is a mythic, so you know he's going to be good. He's going to be awesome in limited. He is a limited bomb. So you get a 5/5 body, which is, okay, that's fine. And then on top of it, though, every time you play a land, you get another 5/5. Okay, that's awesome. And whenever he or another elemental dies, you basically get to lightning bolt something. Yeah, that's crazy. So you're going to be more than happy to play this in limited if you're in those colors. Now let's talk about commander. This is a really cool commander card, and maybe that's what they're doing with some of the rare and mythic rare levels of the gold cards, is trying to give you some more big battlecruiser magic. So this is awesome. I could certainly use this as a commander. Put this into play, get some 5/5 elementals. If it dies, it dies. And I'm also doing direct damage when these things are dying. This will be really fun to build around a commander. Resolute Blade Master. So this is interesting. This is the ally that gives double strike. Now it costs 5 for a 2/2, so it's not super economically priced, but it's still a real strong effect, and it goes really well with some of the allies that are going to pump your team. So there's the green one that gives +2/+2, that type of stuff. So this is pretty good. I mean, I'll play this in limited for sure if I'm in an ally build. If I'm not in an ally build, I probably don't want to spend 5 for a 2/2, even if it does have double strike. That just seems very costly. As far as Standard goes, could this be in a ally deck? Maybe, especially if I'm just cheating this in the graveyard and playing Rally the Ancestors or something like that. I could see it perhaps showing up in the build, even if it's just a one of. Next is Royal Spout, and I really like these tempo plays. This costs 3, which borders on expensive, and it is sorcery speed, but I still feel good about it. If my opponent is behind on mana, this can steal a game for you. They've finally kind of put out a creature. You've been beating them down. It goes back on top of their library. You know they're not going to get any more threats to cast next turn other than that same card again. Just puts them back a turn. Feels like a time walk. The Awaken is pretty decent too. I don't mind paying 6 for a 4 Awaken. I think that's good as well. I could certainly see myself playing this one in limited quite a bit. Don't know if it's fast enough for Standard. Don't really see it being quick enough there, but definitely a good limited card. Next we have Sire of Stagnation. I almost feel like they should have called this Sire of Standstill. Anyone who played with the old card Standstill back in the day. You get a 5/7 body for 6, and you can draw cards off this. You can mill your opponent a little more and make way for your processors. It does a lot of stuff. Now it is mythic. It is a very good card. Your opponent kind of has to deal with this, or else they're just going to get buried in card advantage pretty quickly. So great limited card, not too much more I can say about it there. Kind of a cool thought for Commander, but again, I think it's just a card that's going to get you killed when you put it out in a multiplayer game. As far as Standard goes, unfortunately, I don't think it will quite get there. I mean, could be a top of a curve in a control deck? Maybe, but the only thing is your opponent can play around this a little bit because they can simply not play lands and maybe be able to get away with that at some point. Skyrider Elf. So let's for a moment forget that it's an ally, and let's take away that converge line as well for just a second. And let's just say this is a 2/2 flyer for 2. That's pretty awesome. I'm more than happy to play that. Now let's add the ally on top of it. It can trigger rallies. That's awesome. And now look at that converge effect as well. So minimally, I'm getting myself a 2/2 flyer for 2. If I have a third color, now it's a 3/3 flyer for 3, and so on and so forth. This is one of the best converge cards. This is good enough to see Standard play just because it's so economical. This is a fantastic limited card. This is just overall fantastic because of the value. Ulamog's Nullifier. This one's pretty interesting. So if I know for sure I'm going to be able to ingest, this is a pretty cool card because I'm paying 4 for 2/3, but I'm basically countering a spell as well. It's in the colors of the processors and the ingest creatures. So hopefully if you're in those colors, you have enough little ingest creatures that this will be some value for you. And in that case, yeah, you're going to run this in limited and be very, very happy. Way too conditional, obviously, for a standard card at this point, I think. But really good limited card. You're going to be happy to play this in that particular build. Veteran War Leader. So here's another ally card. This was another one that was in the dual decks. As you go wide with this, it gets bigger and bigger. And even if you're not playing a ally rally strategy, it's still awesome because I could be playing tokens and this guy just gets huge. He doesn't have evasion in that case, but he's still pretty good. But if I have even a couple allies, just giving him first strike and trample is a pretty big deal in itself. Vigilance is fine too, but those are some pretty nice abilities to have on a big creature. And then you look at the fact he only costs 3, super economical. This will be a bomb in limited. And this is going to be another one to watch out for in that standard deck. I think it's economical enough that you could see it potentially show up in an ally standard deck if it falls into these colors. And again, one of those colors is white, so Rally the Ancestors could be relevant as well. All right, we made it to the artifacts, so we're getting there now. Aligned Hedron and Network. This is a good sideboard card for when your opponent's playing a lot of big Eldrazi's and you need a way to kind of stop them. Now, I don't really see this as being a standard card because I think standard's going to be a little leaner, but definitely in limited, there'll be times where you want to board this in. This is also a very interesting commander card to me because there are so many big creatures on the board in commander. Again, this might get you killed when you play it, but if it's able to kind of let you go in and win a game or take out an opponent, it might be worth playing. So interesting. I like to see how this unfolds in commander, but it potentially could be very powerful in that environment as well. Hedron Archive. So here's another way to ramp your mana. This is the double Mind Stone card, and it's going to be good for you. I mean, Mind Stone was a great card. This isn't going to be maybe quite as good considering it's more expensive, but I don't mind paying 4 to tap for 2 mana and also have the ability later in the game to sack it to draw cards. I'm going to have no problem playing it, unless maybe I'm playing a really strong aggro build or something like that, but for the most part in limited, I'm more than happy to play this. Standard-wise, I think it's a little too expensive to kind of get there. It's also a great commander card. It helps you kind of power out more big stuff in commander and play that battlecruiser magic. Hedron Play. This is a good sideboard card in limited. It's at common, so a lot of these will be floating around, but this is just when your opponent's playing, especially the big Eldrazi's, and you just need an answer to them. You got this. And this is pretty cheap. It only costs 1 to cast, 2 to equip, so it might not even be horrible to main deck one of these just in case, because there are so many Eldrazi's out there, and there are some cheaper ones as well, so you'll get some value out of this either way in limited. Pathway Arrows. Here's another answer to colorless creatures, basically. It does a point of damage, kind of turns a creature into a pinger, which is not a bad thing, especially if they have Eldrazi tokens out there. But at the same time, it's also tapping larger creatures. So it's pretty good. It does a lot of work. Again, it's cheap. It only costs 1. and 2, so this might be a sideboard card in some cases, but I don't think you would do bad to main deck this one, especially because it does have the ping effect as well. Unfortunately, the ping effect only hits creatures, can't hit opponents, which is a little sad, but I guess for that casting cost, that's probably acceptable. Yeah, it's decent. It's gonna do a little work against the Eldrazi hordes for you in limited. Pilgrim's Eye. This is nice for landfall builds of limited decks. Basically, you can put this out. It's just a tiny flyer. Seems a little expensive, but I get to take a basic land card and put it into my hand, shuffle my library. So that basically means I'm going to guarantee myself landfall again on the next turn. So I do like that. It's a nice little enabler if you're playing the green-red landfall deck. Slabhammer. This is another landfall card. Again, it's pretty cheap. Only 2 to cast, 2 to equip. But when that equipped creature attacks, you can return a land to your hand, which means, again, for the next turn, you know for sure you'll have a landfall trigger. Not always going to be good. Sometimes this can get a little wonky, especially if you need to get more lands into play to ramp to something else. But at the same time, this will do a little bit of work in some of those landfall decks. Not always going to make your cut, but it's out there if you're playing green-red. And we're on to the lands. So you'll see here, I did the lands a little bit differently than I normally do. Typically I'll do alphabetical order, but there are some cycles, so I want to keep the cycles together. So you'll see that as we go through. The first card is a standalone. It's Ally Encampment. And this is awesome for allies. I don't know what else to say. I mean, it lets you cast allies of any color. It lets you protect an ally by sacrificing it. And more importantly, not necessarily just protecting them, but bringing them back to your hand so you can cast them again and get the trigger effect again. You're going to want to run this if you're playing allies and limited. And on top of that, this will be a part of that ally standard deck, which I'm sure will exist. Blighted Cataract. So this is the first in a cycle of 5 blighted lands. Each of them sacrifice for one of the 5 colors and give you a trigger. This one goes along with blue. First off, overall, let me mention this about all 5 of the cards. They don't come into play tapped, which is nice, but they only tap for colorless mana. So know your deck a little bit. If you're stretching, maybe playing Converge, trying to get a lot of different colors, these might not be good in your deck. But if you're playing a 2-color deck and you want to run maybe one of these Blighted Cataracts, you might even be able to get away with 2 of them, especially if you're running a lot of colorless creatures or spells as well, then these will be pretty decent. But don't overfill your deck with them. You don't want to draw these as your land drops all the time. Another strategy is sometimes if the effect's powerful enough in your deck, you could actually count this as a spell and not a land, and then it's just an extra land at the beginning, but later in the game it's basically a spell. So just another strategy to think about. This particular one's pretty good though. I like the fact that when I get to the mid to late game, I can sack it and draw 2 cards, and until then, it's giving me mana, so I'm getting a little value out of it. But that's very good. I love the card draw effect on this. Next is Blighted Fen. This one I'm not as excited about, and here's the thing, costs 5 to sack it, and my opponent will sacrifice a creature, but by that point in the game, I'm just afraid my opponent's going to have too many creatures out there. There's also tons of Scion tokens running around. I'm just afraid this thing's just not going to do anything. This one I probably would skip. Even if I'm playing black and a conservative black build, I'm probably not running this. Blighted Gorge. So this one deals 2 damage to creature or player. I don't mind that. This I would play if I'm playing some red. I have no problem dealing 2 damage to something, or could be the player, could be a creature that they have, but this one I think is good enough to run. Blighted Step. 2 life. I'm sideboarding this one in. This is when I'm going up against a really aggressive red build, red-black build. Then I'll board this in because I want the life gain. This one is maybe my favorite of all of them. You get to search up 2 basic lands and put them in the battlefield tapped. This seems just so, like, I don't know, out of whack with some of the others. The card draw one's real good too. I like the blue one, but this one I think may be my favorite. I just love the fact that I'm ramping with this thing. It only costs 4 to do it too, which is quite reasonable. I'm getting landfall triggers off of it. This is really cool. This one's awesome and definitely the winner, I think, out of the 5. Next cycle we're going to look at is the dual land cycle, and Don't know what to call these. Different names have been thrown around. Some people call these tango lands because it takes two to tango, I guess. There you have it. I've heard them called battle lands. I've heard them called slow lands. But whatever you want to call them, they're pretty good. So this one's Canopy Vista. Let me say overall about this cycle. Right now we only have the allied colors. I hope we see the enemy colors in the next set. I think they're a pretty cool cycle. This is only the third time in Magic history that a dual land has also counted as its basic land types. So in other words, this is a forest and a plains in its land type, which is kind of cool if you can say, for example, search for a forest. This counts. Now, this doesn't count as a basic land, but does count as a forest and does count as a plains. This was done with the original dual lands that came out in Alpha, Beta, Unlimited, and Revised, and it was done again with the shock lands, but those are only two times that's happened. That little line of text is actually pretty powerful and pretty important on there. Fetch lands can fetch these up, so if you're using your Khans fetch lands in Standard, these will be great. So as far as where you'll see these played, first off, I'll say, yeah, you're going to see these in Standard, especially with fetch lands. These are going to be quite awesome for fixing in Standard. These are going to be great for you in Limited. There's no reason not to play them. The only reason I wouldn't play one is I might not play the black and red one if I'm going super aggro, just because the fact that it could come into play tapped the first couple turns might slow me down, and that's where an aggro deck really wants to do a lot of its work. So that might keep me from playing that particular one. Other than that, play these. They're going to be great. They're awesome. They're going to see play, obviously, in other casual formats as well. They'll see play in Commander. Great cycle of lands so far. So having said that, yeah, they start off maybe a little slow. They come into play tapped until you get two or more basic lands on your side. The concept behind these is it doesn't allow you to just stuff these all into some crazy 5-color deck and get a lot of value out of them. But if you're playing 2 colors, they become very, very good very fast. So here's the first one, Canopy Vista. Then we get Cinderglade, Prairie Stream. I like the art on that one. Smoldering Marsh. And finally, Sunken Hollow. Okay, so let's move on to Evolving Wilds. Of course, this is a reprint that's been seen a million times, but what's really cool about this card in particular in the set is it triggers landfall. So I can play this, sack it, grab another land, now I get 2 landfall triggers in a single turn. That's pretty cool. So you'll be more than happy to play this for color fixing, especially if you're trying to do some converge shenanigans. But also at the same time, it's great for landfall. Even if I'm only in a 2-color landfall deck, I'll probably run this. Typically, if I'm playing 2 colors, I don't run Evolving Wilds, but if I'm playing red-green landfall, yeah, I'll run some Evolving Wilds. They'll be pretty good. Probably a little too slow in Standard, considering you have fetch lands and stuff. You really don't need this, but it's great in Limited. Okay, we're on to another cycle, and this one is a cycle of common lands. These are kind of like little spell lands. You get little triggers when you play them. Now, they do come into play tapped, so overall, let me kind of talk a little bit about the cycle first. You don't want to stuff too many of these into your deck. One-ofs here and there can be very good. You don't want to slow yourself down too much. Again, if I'm playing the aggro build, I'm probably going to be real careful about maybe even putting just one of these in my deck just because I want to do work on the early part of the game. Other than that, you might want to run a 1 of or 2 of these here and there in your deck. They'll slow you down a little bit, but this isn't necessarily the fastest environment in the world. It's not as fast as Magic Origins, so you shouldn't be punished too badly. So let's start looking at the individual cards. So this is Fertile Thicket. This is the green one, and when it comes into play, you get to search your library to put a land on the top of it. Now these are common, so adjust your expectations. You're not going to get a card into play or in your hand or anything like that. It's going to go top of your library, but next turn you're going to get a land and you're going to have a landfall trigger. I like this one, especially in the landfall build. Here's the red one. Like I said before, I'm a little hesitant to play this if I'm going super aggro, but I do like the little +1/+1 bump in the first strike is actually pretty good. So unless I'm super aggro, I don't mind playing one of these. Orchery Mire, and this is the black one. This is decent. You take a creature card from your graveyard. It goes on top of your library. So again, it doesn't go right to your hand or anything, but I think that's okay. Maybe not one of my favorites out of this cycle, but at the same time, there's a place for it. You're going to get card value, especially in the late game. This can get pretty good. Don't mind running one of these. Next is Sandstone Bridge, and this is the white one. This one might be my least favorite of the group. Vigilance is fine, and the +1/+1 is fine, but not super exciting. And Skyline Cascade. This is the blue one. My only issue with this one is for it to get any value, your opponent has to already have a creature tapped. And that gets awkward, especially if you're at the point you just need to play your land and you need to get it in the battlefield, and your opponent doesn't have a creature tapped. You feel like it's kind of a waste, just slowed you down for no reason. But again, running a 1-of I think is fine. There are going to be times where this will be a good effect. Now we move on to, I guess, a little mini cycle. We get 2 of the manlands, and I'm assuming we're going to see the other 3 enemy colored manlands in the next set. So this is the first one. This is the green-blue one, Lumbering Falls. So a couple things. These are great. If you played with the manlands, which were the allied colors back in World Wake, these things are awesome. They're going to see standard play, both of them. I have no doubt in my mind. They're going to be great for you, and they're going to do a lot of fine work in Limited. These are really fun in Commander. This is just overall great cards. It's a regular land, so you can't search it up with fetch lands or anything like that, but that's okay. There are cards out there that do let you pull a land. On top of that, they work pretty well with the Awaken mechanic too, so they're just doing a whole lot of things. They do come into play taps, so they slow things down a little bit. Again, be cognizant of that if you're in an aggro build. Other than that, you're going to pretty much just always play these if you're in these colors. They're awesome. They're also going to help you with splashing and stuff. So this one in particular I really like. Now it costs 4 to turn it into a creature, but you're getting a 3/3 with hexproof, and that hexproof's pretty cool. The only thing that's awkward about it is the fact that, say, equipment or something like that will fall off when it turns back into a land, because it's a land, but at the same time you kind of want to buff hexproof creatures whenever you can. But still, even aside from that, this is pretty awesome. You'll be very happy with this card. And here's the second one, Shambling Vent. This one is Orzhov colors, and you get a 2/3 with lifelink. A little bit smaller in this case, but still lifelink's pretty significant, especially against aggro. It survives things like board sweepers. One of the big uses we saw with the old manlands was control decks, obviously. So yeah, these cards are awesome. All right, next is Sanctum of Ugin. Really like this card. Basically, it taps for colorless mana, so be cognizant of that when you build your deck. But at the same time, when you play a colorless spell, 7 or greater, you can just go ahead and tutor for a colorless creature card and put it in your hand. Okay, that's awesome. So now I play 1 big spell or 1 big Eldrazi, and I get to look for another one. Great limited card in the right build, of course. You want to have those big colorless cards to play. This is also going to be really cool in Commander, I think. In certain Commander decks, this will be fun. Not probably where you want to be for Standard, but still a real good limited card. Shrine of the Forsaken. This one's good, don't get me wrong. This is another one of those cards, I guess I compare it to older cards like Temple of the False Gods, and I get a little bit disappointed. This gives you a mana, and once you get to the point where you have 7 or more lands, you get 2 mana out of it. It's really not bad, and they probably had to be real careful with pushing this type of effect, because this can be very, very powerful. So 7 lands just seems a little ho-hum, but it will do work for you if you're trying to play some big Eldrazi's or big spells. It's good enough for Commander for sure, and it's good enough in some limited decks. Spawning Bed. This I like a lot. This reminds me a little bit of the Thopter land card that we had in Magic Origins, and I always play that card when I get it. It just is value. I mean, it's colorless mana in the beginning, so again, be cognizant of that when you build your deck. But it doesn't come into play tapped or anything, and then later in the game when you just need some extra push, you sack it, and in this case you get 3 Eldrazi Scions, which are going to help you with ramp, help you do some other things, helps you go wide in those decks. So yeah, just a lot of versatility here. This is going to be a real fine limited card for you, and could be fun in some Commander decks as well. Having said that, we made it. That is the entire set for Battle for Zendikar. So what's next? Tomorrow I'm going to be back with another video, which is going to be our pre-release primer. We're going to talk about the mechanics. We're going to talk about if it's your first pre-release, what you should bring with you, what you can expect. We'll talk about the new Mulligan rule, which goes into effect officially at the pre-release and is something that I know I'm going to have to work really hard to remember because I keep forgetting about it when I play Magic. We're also going to look at all the expeditions and talk about expeditions. We're going to look at the archetypes that you want to watch out for when you build your sealed deck. So we have a lot of good stuff coming up tomorrow. But if you've missed any of the set review, we also have a playlist. Go back and take a look and help yourself hopefully get prepared for pre-release and release weekend and all that stuff that's coming up. I'm pretty excited about the new set. If you haven't checked out our Patreon page yet, please do so. These videos are made possible by patrons like yourself. So any support I super appreciate, and thank you to my current patrons. They've already have improved the channel, even if it's just a small amount. It really helps. Anything really helps us make better videos. So thanks a lot. Have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow for the pre-release primer. Hey, thanks as always for watching. These videos are made possible by viewers just like you through Patreon. Please check out our Patreon page by clicking on the top right. Down below, we have more links to quality Magic the Gathering content. And if you're interested in seeing trading cards open that aren't Magic the Gathering, check out the link to our trading card channel, Heroes and Legends Trading Cards. Thanks and have a great day.